Hey there, this is Mark. In this video, we're going to cover the Combine folder of the node library. If I click in Combine, you see that I have several nodes that we can cover here. And in order to explain the first one, I'm going to go to the right side of my node view where I have a circle, triangle, and square. In order to see them, I have to switch my display to display 2 as we're still looking at the original display. So I'll choose this down and choose display 2. Now you can see that I have a rendered version of my three geometric shapes. What I want to do is I want to overlap these shapes so that we can see how blending works. So I'll take my circle and I'll move it over here, and then I'll take my square and move it over here so that all three shapes are overlapping. Now I'll drive a blending mode. If you open up the layer properties for blending, you see you have two options here. And unless you're going to export to a SWF, you don't have to worry about this at all. In blend mode, if you click this down, you can see that we have very familiar add, multiply, lighten, hard light, vivid light, and so on. Blend modes are essentially an operation for pixels on top to blend to the pixels below. Such as the circle will blend to the triangle, will blend to the square, will blend to the color card. If I choose add mode, for example, and I'll wire that under the circle, right now I'm saying the circle blend with an add mode down over top the other three. If I render it, I'll see the results. So as you can see, the red circle is blending with the triangle, the square, and the gray color card. And depending on the values of the triangle, square, and color card, we're getting the result of that blend mode. If I choose a multiply, that will darken the pixels, and as you can see, the pixels go black inside these shapes, and because the semi-gray is lighter than these two, we're still getting a value of that circle. Now I'm not going to go into the information pixel math that is all the blend modes. For instance, an add is literally adding pixels, whereas a multiply is multiplying fractions of RGB values. But you can find that information online and figure which ways your blend modes can work best for you. One thing that is quite important to remember is that depending on the way your shapes are going to composites can limit your blend modes. So blend modes need to pass through in order to blend properly, otherwise they will stop at whatever composite they are in. To show a brief lesson of this, I'll just drag a composite and I'll wire this down. And I'll put the triangle in this flattened composite here, as well as the circle. So what's essentially happening is the circle is blending to the triangle, but then because it is flattened, it's not passing through to the square and the color card. This is a bitmap flattened composite. If we switch to a pass-through, now we have the information going through to the bottom composite. So this is explained a little more later, but just so you understand that blend modes are completely dependent on whether they're passing through to the geometry you want to affect, or if they are capped to whatever geometry is in a single composite, such as a bitmap. Now let's take a look at these two, composite and composite generic. I'm going to wire these back in normally. And let's remove that blend mode. So if I wire a composite and a composite generic, you'll see that they look similar, but one has two inputs. The difference is that a composite can hold multiple ports. You can wire in as many wires as you want in here and just stack them one on top of the other. Whereas a composite generic can just basically combine two images from left to right and move on, so on. So the way that you would do this is you would probably have the color card and the square going in here, and then they would blend together. The advantage of doing it this way is that you have your blend modes right in here where you can actually add, subtract, and do different kinds of transformations here. However, in general, in the industry, you'll be using the composite bar generally, not the composite generic, and then you'll be able to choose between your bitmaps, pass-throughs. The types of composite are covered more in depth in compositing too. Now we've already covered the cutter in the favorites tutorial, so let's cover the highlight and the tone. And for that, we can go back to our display 1. I have a character and I have a background. So what I can do is I can actually create a highlight, and that's basically going to wire right underneath my character. Anytime you bring in a node, if you're not sure what it is, you can just click the little nub. So you can see this is the image and this is the mat. I'm going to actually take one of these shapes and drag it over to the left side. So let's wire the circle in to see where it is, and you can see it's right on that side. If I simply wire it into the matte port of my highlight, you can see that it's basically highlighting, brightening the character wherever that shape is. And we can see it by rendering that up. You can also choose to change the radius of your highlight to be sharp or fuzzy. You can choose a color for that highlight. Or you could even use a multiplicative mode, which is covered in another tutorial. The same concept applies to the tone node, which is basically going to darken your character wherever you tell it the information is. So now I'm using the exact same shape, but it's darkening the character. I have the same parameters as I had with the highlight. I can change this to a sharper shape. I can change it to a blurrier shape with a 5. I can also change it to a multiplicative mode, which we again cover in a different module. Now there's something called transformation switch. You don't really need to worry about that. It's mostly used inside of character builds. So let's just cover image switch. The image switch node basically says whatever I'm connecting in the top part, I can then control what comes outside by using the image switch port numbering. So if I wire the image switch in, I can see my character, but I can't see my circle. If I go to the properties, I can see port index 0 is what is showing. Now 0 is the rightmost port, and then it goes 1, 2, 3 based on whatever is plugged into the information afterwards. To explain this even more, let's drag in a triangle. So the triangle's on port 2, circle's on port 1, character's on port 0. So if I say port index 1, now I'm seeing the circle. If I say port index 2, now I'm seeing the triangle. So knowing that you can switch the image that way, you could animate this function and basically switch it from a character to a circle to a triangle over time if you wanted to. This can prove to be very useful when doing some advanced compositing. Last we have the matte composite. So this basically allows you to combine matte shapes to determine what you want to do with them. So as you know, we've used cutters and we've used highlights. Let's use a cutter here to demonstrate this. Instead of just plugging a circle in, which cuts the character by the circle, or cutting the triangle, which cuts the character by the triangle, we can add a matte composite to add or subtract the different types of shapes we want to determine exactly what we want to cut with. So if I wire the circle in, I now have the circle going into the matte. If I wire the triangle, I'm adding the triangle piece as well. And if we look at it with the display, we can see those shapes are what's left. The matte composite basically turns all the shapes into black and white images, or rather opaque and transparent images. Now if I open the properties, I can choose to subtract that triangle from the circle. So now we have this shape, which is what's going to be used as a cutter. So instead of having the circle entirely cutting, we have the circle cut by the triangle, and that's what's being cut in the cutter shape. Now this is a little more advanced, but just so you understand, this module allows you to build upon itself mattes, subtract them, intersect, and invert them. So instead of having big modules that will create a shape with multiple cutters, you have one single matte composite to determine what goes into the cutter shape, or the highlight, or the tone, or whatnot.